The latest developments in the crisis in Ukraine, which for now remains a war of words. Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke publicly on the conflict for the first time since December, and Putin put the blame on the U.S., which he claims has forced Russia into a dangerous corner. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Boris Johnson of the UK, as he stood alongside Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, warned Russian mothers and parents of a, quote, fierce and bloody resistance, unquote, facing Russian troops if there is an invasion. ABC Chief Foreign Correspondent Ian Pannell joins us from Ukraine with all of these developments. So, Ian, let's start with these comments from Putin. He says the U.S. ignored Russia's security concerns, Putin again demanding that Ukraine never become a NATO member because he argued that Western military forces would then pose a threat to Russia in Crimea. Is he really concerned that a NATO that includes Ukraine would invade Crimea, or is there more going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is more about having a sense of being surrounded by NATO. I mean, he doesn't see NATO as a defensive alliance. He sees it as a threat. He's obviously concerned partially about Crimea. I mean, the point was made by the Ukrainians in the last couple of days. People are talking about Russia invading. Well, they already did invade. And we can't talk about any normalization of relations while Crimea is effectively annexed, invaded, and the East was de facto invaded, certainly with this Russian-backed separatist movement there. Look, as the Russians tell it, Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov, foreign minister today, both pretty much saying the same thing, that the West has reneged on past promises not to expand NATO to the east. And they cite specific countries like Poland, like Romania, like the Baltic states, and they would really see Ukraine, and that's certainly what they say, as the last part of that. At that point, they're concerned that Ukraine would have access to the same weapons that the rest of NATO has, that if there was any incident in Ukraine, then of course we know the clause within that all NATO members have to abide by, that an attack on one is an attack on everyone. And that is certainly what they're saying publicly, and they acknowledge that the American written response to their demand for these security guarantees effectively says you're not going to get this guarantee that Ukraine will never join NATO, at least in principle, because they won't allow Russia to have some kind of lock over any country joining NATO. So, yes, lots of developments. We've been talking about this for weeks now, Kira and Terry. Lots of developments, but I don't really see much progress. It's good news that they are still talking, they are still communicating, but that build-up is also going on at the same time, and I just don't see a way out of this really diplomatic impasse.
Well, Ian, let's talk more about President Zelensky and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. They held a press conference today, as you know. We carried it live here on ABC News Live. Johnson defended the U.S. and UK intelligence on the Russian threat, which critics have said was overblown. Take a listen.
This is a clear and present danger, and we see large numbers of troops massing. We see preparations for all kinds of operations that are consistent with an imminent military campaign.
But, Ian, President Zelensky has been one of the ones who consistently downplays the threat, quite the opposite of what Johnson was saying there. So what is he saying today? What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but in some senses, they've got two very different audiences. Certainly for the Biden administration and Prime Minister Johnson, the UK government, they feel that they need to keep NATO, keep the alliance together. And in order to do that, you have to elevate the extent of the threat, or at least accentuate how serious a moment this is, in order to stiffen the resolve of those NATO members who might be wavering somehow. President Zelensky's got a very different audience. He's got the Ukrainian people. And what he doesn't need and what he doesn't want is a sense of panic to set in. He doesn't want to run on the banks. He doesn't want the currency to collapse. It's a relatively fragile economy. It's getting stronger. Ukraine has made incredible progress over the last few years. Some people say that's one of the things that irks Vladimir Putin. But the truth is, it's not as strong as many other Western economies, and it would be vulnerable to any kind of sense of large-scale panic. And that's why I think you're seeing those two different arguments. And I pressed President Zelensky on this, just a few days ago, and he'd been asked the same question repeatedly. And I said to him, look, you wouldn't be the first Ukrainian president to have underestimated the Russians. What if you're wrong? Have you thought about that? He almost looked angry at that response. He said, yeah, you know what? We have thought about that. We do think about that. We are preparing for that. What we don't want to do is talk about it all the time. So differences in emphasis, but not necessarily a difference in the analysis, although worth adding this use of the word imminent. And we have heard it from the Biden White House, or that they have enough forces in place, not necessarily saying an invasion is going to happen any time. I think the Ukrainians are saying no, they do not have all the troops in place to man all of that heavy equipment, and there are some key pieces of infrastructure that you would need for a large-scale invasion. Those also aren't there.
And another development today, Ian. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, on the phone for 30 minutes, looking for a diplomatic off-ramp here. Well, after what Putin said today, what are the bargaining chips in this diplomatic dance?
Well, again, it's what you think is going to work as a deterrent. And there was an interesting conference here that was attended by 4 or so former U.S. ambassadors, a number of key military figures, retired generals, and they were all arguing that what should happen, rather than saying to Putin, these are the things that are going to happen if you invade. And we've seen this from the Senate, from Capitol Hill, the idea that this very tough sanctions legislation against Russia is probably going to be approved in a rare show of bipartisanship, that would be, in some senses, a stick. But there also needs to be a carrot. And the argument that's made by a number of these ambassadors is, you know what, if you already move some extra troops into Eastern Europe, and you already bolster your support for Ukraine, then you've got bargaining chips there. So you can offer concessions to the Russians on those things in exchange for their troops pulling back. But there is some common ground there. For example, missile treaties, something that the Trump administration withdrew from. There are agreements to be done there on the conduct of exercises. It's something that annoys Russia intensely. NATO exercises being conducted so closely to its border. There's been a suggestion from the Biden administration that these are things that perhaps that we could coordinate on. So there is a sense that they have many things that they could work on. But that one key issue, which is Russia's main issue, is what Vladimir Putin reiterated again today, this security guarantee that Ukraine, and in the past he's mentioned Georgia as well, will never join NATO. He's not going to get that. So what does he do next?
Because there are bargaining chips, as you point out, but to get a deal, you got to want a deal. Ian Pannell, thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.